Today is Tuesday, January 7th. It's a pre-meeting before our regularly scheduled January meeting. We'll stand, actually there's no flag, so we'll skip the Pledge of Allegiance and go to, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Chair, I'd like to make a motion consistent with our discussion to amend the agenda as follows. And conceptually, it's to add an executive session after item number 4, which is budget discussion, and then come back out of executive session, continue budget discussion. So that's the gist of it, but here's the renumbering. Oh, and also to strike section 5, board self-governance, because I think for various reasons we need to focus on the budget tonight. So what I'd propose, Chair, is striking 5 and inserting in its place executive session with the same language in 6A presently. So then after this interim executive session, add continuation of budget discussion in open session. And then after that, go back into executive session, but this time for both labor negotiations purposes and confidential personnel matters.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Okay, the agenda has been approved. Next on the agenda is public comment.
So we have a chair right over there, and there is a microphone for our ATN. First up is Rajni Edens. On deck is Leslie St. Pierre.
Hi, welcome, Rajni.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here. I wanted to communicate some of the challenges and hardships I've been suffering as kind of a district employee in limbo. I had suffered some defamation in response to me addressing the racial climate and culture of a program I had been involved in for some years, and was never really given redress to address that with integrity. So I feel like I need some clarity maybe from the board or some guidance on how to find out how to address the situation with integrity. So I was just kind of looking to communicate that directly, because I feel like there's a lot of racial issues that need some redress in our country at large, and Burlington is it's not separate from that. So most recently it surfaced where I had the opportunity to present in different capacity in schools, and then suddenly the opportunity was withheld from me without ever communicating to me as what it had to do with. I was never given any indication clearly about who had stated what the cause was, and I was in fact given multiple people to contact, and every person addressed the other person as having the information. So I'd really like some clarity on how to move forward on that. So I feel like that's kind of symptomatic of the culture and the climate of the district at large, and a huge need for addressing things with integrity and clarity. Thank you.
Leslie St. Pierre, up on deck. Jim Kelly.
Hi, thank you. All right. I'm going to put these notes here because if I hold them, I'm going to shake. So I'm here to talk about the instructional coach position that's been up to whatever you guys want to do, get rid of it in the schools. I wanted to talk about the importance of an instructional coach, and I teach at Hunt Middle School. I'm going to base my position on the instructional coach that we have and what she's brought to our school. Last year we were in a hard time. We struggled over at Hunt Middle School. We struggled with students. We struggled with climate, culture. Our instructional coach, along with doing all her instructional coach things, came across and we did a reset. She included the whole staff in this whole reset. We came up with this plan. We have 3 things that we go by. Totally changed the climate and the culture of our whole school. I mean, it's beautiful to be there. Everybody loves going to school. We love being there. And that's just secondary. When you get to what the instructional coach does, there's not one meeting that you can go to at our school, or a group meeting, or a circle with the adults, where we're talking about engagement or anything, where every staff member says, oh yeah, I'm working on that with Nadia. Oh yeah, I'm working on this with Nadia. It's like you just get this big elation and feeling. I mean, she is making each and every one of us a better teacher. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. When she came here, I was like, I couldn't look at her because I'm going to cry. And I thought that's why you brought the tissues out. But then I saw her spill coffee.
We did.
Thank you. I might need them. She has done so much for us as a staff. And when you think about this board, and I think we want to focus on our students and what we can do for them, there's nothing more that you can do for our students than to give them teachers with incredible professional development who want to work together and come together and who are there for our students. I mean, if you have not been in Hunt Middle School, I suggest you come over and see it, feel the climate, feel the culture yourself. Our instructional coach has been a huge part of that. All of us teachers, I mean, we were asked today, we went to our in-service this past Friday, of vacation. Sorry, it's been a long day. Nobody minded being there. We all benefit from it. We're moving forward. We're doing things that are productive. We're working on engagement. We're figuring out how to do it. We're doing it collaboratively. It's just an amazing, amazing place to be and to be a part of. And I just think it would be a huge injustice to our students and to the staff if you got rid of that position. I know some of you have had instructional coaches in the past and it didn't sound like that, but welcome to 2020. This is a new decade. We're moving forward, and it's just, I beg you to keep the positions. And I hope that they're the same at the other schools, but it is hugely, vastly important for us. Thank you.
Jim?
Don't take her! No, I'm just kidding.
Up on deck, Ryan Nest.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jim Kelly. I am the assistant principal at Hunt Middle School. So I came also to talk about the role of the instructional coach position. And I have to say that I think it's probably the best model of PD delivery that I've ever seen in my years of education, and I've been in education for a long time. And I think that's because it can be so differentiated and individualized to the needs of the teacher. It's in the environment where they get the relationships, they build them, they're able to support in real time, push into classrooms, see what's happening, and be that true coach. Here's what's going well, here's what's not. You had this goal, here's I can support you, here's what you said you wanted to do, let's talk about that. And they can do that at whatever level the people are, so they're always working towards that improvement. In addition, we have themes at our school. So this year our themes are engagement and differentiation. Engagement, how do you hook the kids in? How do you get them excited and want to be in class? Differentiation, how do you meet them where they are? So that you're hitting them at the right level so they can be supported. Everyone's working on the same thing, but they might be doing different things around that. And we're able to do that because we have a coach who knows that topic so well and is able to differentiate across all the needs of the people in there. The feedback from teachers, as you heard, have been overwhelming, and this is over the period of the 2 years. We do pluses and deltas after every meeting, all our PD, overwhelmingly, and we'll submit those at some point later. Pluses about how effective the PD has been, how excited people are. It has been a huge attribute in terms of getting collaboration, getting people working and pulling in the same direction. That has had, as you've heard, it's been one of the big helps in our climate and culture at Hunt. We've been making that a huge focus since Maddie and I got there. Nadia's been a big piece of that, and it's just helped us. You know, you engage kids, you start meeting them where they are. They're not out in the halls. They want to be in the classrooms. They want to be learning. They want to be growing. It's a question of equity and closing the achievement gap, which is a district goal. So if we're serious about that, we need to raise our Tier 1 instruction. And I can tell you, as someone who's been in teaching for a long time, as a science teacher, 10 years at Edmonds and other places, it is truly an excellent model of PD. And it really gets people where they need to be in terms of improving their practice. So I do see it as an essential program. I think it would be a huge mistake to remove it. I think it would behoove the board to really take a look and do some more research before they looked at that position, because it raises all boats. It's really working across the arts, all the different content areas. It's not specific to one, and it can address the needs and be flexible as needed. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find money you would leverage that would get you that same thing. So thank you.
How's everyone doing? Good. My name's Ryan Nest. I'm the behavior interventionist over at Hunt. I came on at the same time as Miss Beck Conger, who is our instructional coach. This was last year. And as Leslie kind of pointed out, things were a little bit awry. And I don't think in any school system you can point to just one person for any huge, great change. But I think if you had to, in our case, the huge turnaround that we had, and it's not taking anything away from Jim or from Maddie or from anybody else in our building, but what Nadia has done in our building is insurmountable. It's amazing. If you're talking about direct contact with students, with staff, even staff that she's not supposed to be working with, her and I share an office together, but her impact on me, she inspires me daily, challenges me daily, and I know that I speak for the entire staff in saying that. And she's the one irreplaceable piece in our building. So as Miss St. Pierre stated before, it would be a huge mistake to take that piece away. It would be an injustice to the kids and to the staff. So thank you.
Hello. Happy New Year, and thank you all for your service. I know that it's a thankless task, any form of public service, but particularly school boards. So I wanted to preface this statement with that. I'm responding to the board memo and the suggested, or the memo to the board suggesting amendments to the budget recommendations. I'm very concerned at the tone of those recommendations. My first question is around the quorum of the board and whether open meeting law was upheld when preparing this recommendation, since so many board members seem to be involved in it. I'd also like to ask why you requested the administration to set priorities for the budget and then promptly ignored all of those priorities and set your own list of recommendations. I question why you've ignored requests made by the middle schools and apparently supported by principals at all levels. You recommend cutting instructional coaches. We know that this is a national model. Evidence demonstrates the single best way to improve student outcomes and teaching is through coaching and professional development. Yet you're recommending cutting instructional coaches. I'd like to really understand the evidence base and the data that you're using to back up that recommendation and to disrupt this nationally proven model that we're implementing. You've requested the administration set priorities, and those priorities were set forth with site-based budgeting. Again, that's a demonstrated effective way to ensure that site-based priorities are met. But you've chosen to ignore the recommendations from the professionals that we as a city pay to do this work and set your own list of recommendations. Again, you know, I'd really like to see the data that you've used to back that up. I work in equity and closing opportunity gaps that our youth face day to day. And I know that we have to work with data to ensure that we're really looking to provide supports where those supports are needed and required, and not just where parents with voice and with agency want to see them. You've been adding funding to the BHS budget over the last 3 years, yet all of the data says that we should be increasing funding at pre-K and second grade levels. So again, where's the data that's backing up the recommendations that you're making? Even when you're looking at the elementary programs, it doesn't seem to me to be data-driven. Admittedly, from the outside, I don't know, but as far as I can tell, these Sustainability Academy class sizes don't warrant the additional teacher. The numbers simply don't add up for that. And at BHS, you're requesting $54,000 in such a tight budget year for a 0.6 position to allow 9th grade students to double up in science. Who does this serve? Which children? Again, what's the data? Who are we really supporting with this? Maybe this 0.6 position will probably allow maybe 20 students to take a double on a science course in 9th grade. It's absolutely possible for our students to do this in 10th and 11th grade. My own student did exactly that and was very successful with great thanks to our school district and our teachers. And my last question is around the Department of Justice findings. They've requested that we add funding and positions, and those findings are all equity related, and yet those don't seem to be included in your recommendations. Again, I'm just questioning the equity basis of these recommendations that came from these 6 board members. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak at public comment?
Next would be board reflections. If any board member would like to speak on public comment, what was said at public comment? Commissioner Gulick?
I guess I want to apologize for what, especially the Hunt folks, what seems to be perceived as a fait accompli in terms of budget decisions. It was a group of people who got together and made a list of proposed reductions. It certainly was not a vote by the whole board, and it was not a decision made by all of us. So it is not a fait accompli. We have not discussed it, and we have not voted on it. And I just want to allay some of your fears at this point. We still have a lot of work to do, and I just want to apologize if that's how it was perceived. I know I could see where that could happen. So thank you for speaking up.
Commissioner Carey?
I just wanted to ask if Mr. Edens could get an answer about where he should go next for a process. So if the board could understand what the response will be for him and get information back on that. And secondly, I do want to thank all of the Hunt staff for coming and speaking passionately about this. I think for me, the issue with having a group of board members go off and discuss the budget is just this. It creates churn, it gets people worried, they spend, after a long day, they come out to speak, they have no idea if it's real or not, and it deviated from the process we had all agreed on that was transparent, that the public expected us to follow. And instead, we got a process that became not transparent, and it created alarm. And I think that is a poor governing approach. So I'd just like to thank them again for really speaking passionately, and we'll speak to the specific content later.
Commissioner
Ivanchik. I also would like to thank the Hunt people for coming out, and actually this afternoon I got 3 letters, all from Hunt employees, about their excellent instructional coach, so I'm appreciative of those opinions. It's a really tough budget year, and we are making tough decisions. It looks like we're looking at, even without, and I think we'll see some of this data later in the meeting, even without adding anything, if we just keep everything the way it's been the last school year, over 8% tax increase, which our taxpayers were not happy about. So several board commissioners got together to discuss how we feel that we should develop the following year's budget, and I think some of our questions are still around the instructional coaching model. But evidently, the instructional coach at Hunt is doing an excellent job. We heard from 3 of you this evening, and I got 3 letters already in my email. So thanks for coming out.
Commissioner Fisher?
So Marcella, you said a lot, and I can't respond to all of it, but the question about quorum, I believe that 6 out of the 12 is not a quorum. The quorum is 7. So legally, it was permissible for half of the board to meet. However, being on the outside, I'm not happy. I feel excluded by half of my board. You're my colleagues. and you excluded half of the board from some really important discussions. Every board member should be able to discuss with their colleagues outside of a meeting, right? We know that it's not a good place to have a discussion, but half the board, I think, is a bit too far. That's my take.
Anyone else? And I echo Commissioner Carey. I did receive some emails from Rodney as well, and I am not confident I know where, to send you in this time, and we'll get an answer from Superintendent Obang and HR Z. So we'll be in touch with you tomorrow. All right. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you everyone else, Hunt faculty and other coaches that I see here tonight, for speaking. We appreciate your support and informing the board on the success of what's happening at Hunt. And Assistant Principal Kelly, thank you. So with that, we'll close the public comment board reflections, and we'll move on to item 4, our SY 2021 budget. We'll look to Superintendent Obang and Nate to start us off.
Sure. Yeah, we do have some preliminary information for you. We're hoping we have some priority goals that we hope we can accomplish tonight to help us move along and have a subsequent meeting next week where we can finalize. I know there's lots of discussion around the items on the around the walls here that we've talked about and the percentage impact and things like that. So we thought it'd be prudent for Nate to do a little step back first, give you a little bit of context around the numbers and some of the process pieces, and then we're going to move into a process where you'll get a chance to actually talk about information that we've shared. So we'll take it step by step, and we'll do that.
All right, so we'll move quickly through some parts of this presentation and have a chance for questions if there are some, but we really want to get, as you can see from the agenda, to the later segments that offer the opportunity for some small group work. But I'll take you through kind of items 1 through 4 up there, kind of me presenting some updated information before we transition to the group work. So at the, well, I guess 1 through 3 anyway. So at the next slide, so here are just some changes since we last had conversations about this. One item, piece of good news here is, in particular, the substance abuse prevention staff. That was on our list of additions to the budget. We have been looking at that and feel like we can support that through our Medicaid reimbursement revenue. Medicaid's come up a few times here, and there's been some confusion, which I think maybe a light bulb came on for me recently about where the confusion was coming in. So those substance abuse prevention staff are currently supported in part from a Medicaid revenue that is our administrative claimings revenue. That's a smaller source of Medicaid dollars. This scenario would have them continue to be supported by some of that money, but also be supported by another source, a larger source of Medicaid money, the source that we generally rely on for things like our Howard Center social workers. A big part of that expense is paid for from this Medicaid money. So we can support that, not on a one-time basis, I believe, but on an ongoing basis based on the way we strengthen the revenues in that area. So to me, this is a good example of we should be able to preserve that level of service without having to increase the budget in an area that adds pressure to the tax rate. The second item, similarly, although on a much smaller scale, Commissioner Fisher was able to give us some leads on getting an estimate for an IT audit, and the preliminary audit is actually a pretty small cost for them to do kind of testing of the system generally. This obviously doesn't include money to remediate any major vulnerability that theoretically could be identified, although we hope that there is none. But the point is, it's a small enough amount of money that we didn't feel the need to include it in a budget request. That's something that either over the course of this remaining fiscal year or next fiscal year, we should just be able to manage within our IT budget generally. So those are 2 items that had been discussed about budget adds, and we think we can deliver on the service level there without having to increase our education spending. So those are a couple good news pieces. Okay, and so I just wanted to provide a little bit of context that Jared reminded me that there are some kind of useful round numbers that just help people put budget changes into context. And so I assembled and updated the slide from last year that just shows approximately now what 1% of our total budget is, 1% of our education spending, which is a number that's more directly related to tax rates, and as well as showing the way our education spending figure has increased over the past couple of years. I should make note that I've also just recently added this presentation to board docs, so don't think you have to remember all this or memorize it. It is there for you to look at after the meeting here. Okay, the next slide, and then here's just a quick summary of the last 3 years of new investments. This doesn't mean just total budget growth, right? What I tried to go back and do is roughly carve out the additional services or programming that had been added to the budget over the past 3 cycles, just to give folks a sense of growth in that area. Okay, now we're starting to transition to the tax rate conversation, but I first wanted to address a question that did come up in the wake of that memo, which was whether or not those estimates included the application of the surplus money from FY19. And so the answer is yes, and I created this chart here just to show you kind of how that works and what the impact is. So as you can see, there's a column before the use of surplus. That represents the budget if we assume that we had to fund it without the benefit of any of the surplus funds, and that would produce a tax rate impact of over 10%. As you can see, about 10.5%. And then application of the audited surplus, which is going to be about 257,000. So that's somewhat less than we had prior year, but it's in that same ballpark. So it effectively reduces the tax rate growth by about 2 percentage points. So that's how we get to the 8.5. So in essence, if we didn't have the surplus, we'd be looking at a number that was more like 10.5%. So it is in there. Is the good news. The bad news is it doesn't get any lower than 8.5 by having it in there. Okay, so this is the chart that was circulated in the memo that I sent out, and I just wanted to kind of blow it up so people could see it a little more clearly. We were asked to produce a few different budget scenarios, which were also circulated, and we put up on the wall in the back here for folks who may not have seen them. But what you can see there under the baseline column is the 8.5% property tax rate increase that would result just from kind of the growth that we have projected. And as a reminder, like, where does that come from? There's a few major drivers to that. Number one is the amount of money that we have embedded in the budget for wage growth, contract settlements, and so forth. Then there's about $750,000 worth of costs associated with increased health insurance. There's roughly $750,000 associated with increased debt service based on both the borrowing we have done, but also the anticipation of a much larger phase of borrowing associated with the high school. So that's in there right now, assuming that we'll need to do that next year. And then lastly, there's a pretty significant increase in our special ed funding, in particular for the tuition placements and the professional services that are called for. Those are areas where we've seen a lot of pressure in terms of cost increases, number of students whose IEPs call for those services. And so those kind of 4 major items account for, give or take, like around 3.4 of the $3.5 million education spending increase that you see in the baseline. So as you can see, those are really the major drivers there. So I won't spend a lot of time on this chart other than just to draw your attention to the difference between the property tax increase and the income yield increase. This question comes up on a pretty much regular basis every time we present those 2 different numbers. Why are they different? And the simple answer is the difference between those 2 numbers is wholly attributable to the common level of appraisal. The common level of appraisal is applied to the almost wholly applied to the property tax portion, and it's not applied to an income yield, because the common level of appraisal has to do with the value of property, not the value of your income. And so that is what's accounting for essentially the difference between those 2. We can go into the mechanics of that at some other point, but suffice it to say, for our purposes tonight, that's why those numbers are different. If we had a CLA of 100%, those numbers would be just about the same. Not perfectly, but just about the same. Okay, so the tax estimates. You saw, again, the 8.5% estimate for the baseline. That's based on those four key variables that go into calculating the tax rate. The education spending in yellow, that number I use to reflect the baseline. That's the one that you folks control. We also have a change in our equalized pupil count that decreased by about 50 pupils or so. It was a decrease of 1.31%, and when your equalized pupils decrease, that puts upward pressure on your tax rate. So that's like not a good news in terms of tax rates to see that number go down. The homestead dollar yield, this one increasing in this case is good news. It relieves pressure on the tax rate, although that increase was relatively modest. For example, last year that number was, I think, at least over 3%, if not more. So a way to think about that number, and it's not exactly true, again, because of the complexities of the state formula, but a way to think about that number that would be more true for a smaller district, frankly, would be if every other district in the state did what the state projected, and we increased our budget by our spending per pupil by 2.21%, we'd essentially have no tax increase. So that kind of gives you the ability to do some growth. But again, it's modest here. And it's more than offset by the common level of appraisal, which, as you can see, decreased by 3.71%. That's a significant drop. Obviously, that's bigger than it has been in recent years. And that adds a lot of upward pressure to the tax rate. And while the math isn't exactly perfect, I'm going to kind of fudge it here just to illustrate for you. If you were to add up those percentages, 5.4%, that's upward pressure, right? Add in the 1.31%, upward pressure. Take away 2.21% because that's downward pressure on the tax rate, and then add in the 3.71%, you'd arrive just about in that area of 8.5%. Again, I'm that's not technically the way the formula works, but it gives you a rough illustration of what's driving the tax rate increase on this. So that, I think, is sometimes just helpful to think about it in those terms, at least for me. Okay, so lastly, I wanted to show a few scenarios and then turn it over to the board for the discussion here. The baseline number, as you can see, 8.5%, and that is based on the assumption of ed spending growth of about $3.5 million. So a natural question might be, hey, what would it take in terms of changing that ed spending growth, reducing it, in order to have a projected tax rate increase of 7% or 6% or 5%? That's what's illustrated by this chart here. And as you can see at the bottom, roughly a 1% reduction in that estimated tax rate growth means that we need to reduce our ed spending growth by about $650,000 to buy down 1% on that projected rate. So again, this is kind of intended just to give you some context for I believe what's going to be the first discussion, which is 8.5% the right number to move forward with at this time? And so this hopefully serves to help that discussion. I think at this point, I guess I'll turn it over to the chair unless there's any specific questions, but hopefully we can move right into that discussion.
Great.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is it worth understanding how the statewide education rate of 6% ties into our 8.5%?
You mean the estimates from the state? I think
5.5 cents.
the most important thing, those number, okay, so when the tax commissioner publishes the letter that includes like the dollar yield estimate, they say, oh, this could mean 5.5 cents on the tax rate or something, but they're speaking kind of across the board at a state level, and I don't personally find it especially useful. It's more important, I think, to understand, look, what do those numbers mean for Burlington, and what do they mean for the decisions we're going to make? So yeah, there's pressure on the state ed fund that's resulting in that, and because it's a kind of statewide system, to some extent, we are feeling some of that pressure, but I don't think that it's particularly helpful in understanding the impact on us to be like, oh well, the fact that kind of they're projecting average rates could go up by this much is just like, yeah, you know what, that's true for us too.
But is that generating the pupil figure that's helping us? Like that 2.21 increase in per pupil spending means our tax rate would be higher
if that number, well, right, if the dollar yield were lower,
yeah, if the dollar yield were lower.
If the dollar yield were lower, then our tax rate would be higher. It helps us there, but I think, again, another way I would think of it more in terms of it's that when the state puts out that memo, they're talking about like, hey, generally across the board, if everyone did this, everybody would see tax rates go up on an average by this amount. They're kind of speaking in really broad brush, but of course, probably very few places in the state actually do exactly what's there, and the nature of the ed fund and the way it works and the real mechanics mean that kind of everyone's decision has some impact on other people as well. So I don't think it's particularly prudent to think of it in those terms. I think it's better to understand, just like, what does it mean for us?
I would think that at some point, once we finish the budget and you want to have good communication to the public, and you want to explain the state portion, then we might get into a little bit more detail so you can explain that, hey, the pressure is also starting from the top all the way down. And also we can talk about the city as well, too, at some point. So, I mean, that's like, those for later conversations in terms of strategies and communication, I guess.
Quick question.
Commissioner Gulick?
You mentioned 4 pots of spending that affect Burlington taxpayer, and one of them being the high school bond. That, we don't actually start drawing on that money until we break ground, correct? So.
Not exactly.
Okay.
So two things. So first of all, we've borrowed a little bit of money to support some of the design work,
Yeah.
but a relatively de minimis amount relative to the potential scale of the project. But what is included in my baseline figure for FY21 is debt service on kind of the first phase of significant borrowing. That is not as costly as it will be once we get further down the road,
Right.
but there is a cost even in that first year. And the reason, and I built in, it's, I forget exactly, but let's say 22 million or so, based on some kind of analysis that we did. The reason we are assuming that is even if we don't actually break ground at this point as anticipated until a construction season in calendar year 2021, so a year from this spring, right? Well, that's still within the fiscal year that we're starting to build. Like, we're going to need some of that money potentially toward the tail end of that fiscal year. And not only that, the city typically borrows in November. So not only might we actually need some of that money toward the end of fiscal year 2021, the year we're budgeting now, but we also might need some of that cash in the bank for the period of July 1 through approximately mid-November when the city borrows. Even though that spending might technically occur in fiscal year 22, because this could be such significant cash outlays, we need to make sure that we have the dollars to make those payments. We don't want to essentially be run short of cash, right? So we need to have some of that money banked, even though the actual spending of it might not occur until fiscal year 22. But as a result of doing that borrowing in 21, we'll start to pay for it in 21.
Okay.
And Commissioner Gulick, that's a good question that was asked of us when Nate and I presented with Keith to the Board of Finance. They asked, if we're not breaking ground, why are we borrowing this November? So thank you for that question for the board.
Yeah, because it is kind of hypothetical right now. Yeah, okay.
Is the $3.5 million stuff we've already committed to?
It's baseline, so in a sense, it's the programming and services that we offer right now with kind of the changes that I talked about generally. So, again, we could, for example, say we're not going to plan to do any of that borrowing for the high school. That would just mean, though, that we would not have the money to go forward in any significant way, even in the spring of calendar year 2021. So
in a sense, yes, it is stuff we've already committed to.
By and large.
Well, the flip side of that is everything below that, and it then therefore represents cuts.
Yes.
Okay.
I think based on, and Nate, thank you for Director Lavey for putting together the January 3rd memo for all of us to look at. If we want to go back to slide 2, 3, 4, just again to digest, if there's any questions, not that one, but
Forward
sorry,
couple.
3, 1, 2. Yep. So everyone, I think it would help if anyone has any questions on each of the slides, or if we're all in agreement, if we're silent, we get what each slide means. We don't need any clarification. Because these are the type of emails everybody sends one-on-one, say, ask Nate, so if we can, just so we all, hook, line, and sinker, we understand what each of them say. Okay, next one, Bonnie, if you don't mind. So those were our new investments. So again, which we've communicated, board officers reached out to board members, the substantial investment last year to this district that was put at $2.3 million And again, echoing, you know, the investment in personnel. Next slide. Total budget. That's where we are.
Can I just on this slide here, one of the things that people were asking about is the surplus, and Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, we've used the surplus money is really one-time dollars, right? So that's gonna come back at some point, right? If that 1.3 million is not dedicated to one-time spending, that means we're still gonna have to pay for that again next year. So don't be fooled by, okay, we got 1.3 million that's in for the next, 20 years. That's money that we have to find somewhere, right, at some point.
Commissioner Wick?
And yeah, I'll briefly, at least during my tenure on the board, thanks to your good management, we've had a surplus for those years, and each year we've rolled it into the next budget. And so I know that puts us into the position of kind of hoping and expecting that you'll generate a surplus
Right.
because we're counting on it now. So I get it.
Yeah, and what we've done, if you look back, I think what we've done is always done a partial. If we've invested some of it to reduce the tax rate, and we've kept some, so we were ensured not to have to do the Herculean task of guaranteeing another I think we originally, I remember my first year, I think we were like 1.5 million, something like that, and it's slowly kind of going down a little bit. But just so people aren't informed that, oh, okay, we had the 1 million, but it's sort of one-time money, right? And so if we're using that for things that we're gonna keep for the next 20 years, we're still gonna have to find ways to cover that, right? It's kind of a hidden cost there.
Commissioner Fisher?
But when you say we're gonna have to cover it, meaning if we want to have the same services next year, following year, we're gonna have to fill that gap, either with the surplus or with something else, or we have to cut.
Right. Yeah, and so, again, we have a large budget in, by Vermont standards for sure, and a surplus of 1.3 million is a lot of money. On the other hand, it's not even 2% of our budget. So it's not unreasonable in most years to expect that we'll have some of this extra money available if we do a reasonable job of budgeting and a reasonably kind of responsible and conservative in that approach. But I think to Yao's point, it's important to understand that that's not guaranteed money, right? And sometimes, things could happen that make that number change significantly. Meaning it's not so available. We've also had, like, when my first year, I think it was my first year when we were here, we had a significant situation where the Burlington Electric Department determined that it had overcharged customers, among them the school district, and we got a lot of money in a one-time moment from them. So, it could go in the opposite direction through some events of that nature as well. But
Follow up.
Commissioner Fisher?
So I'm just looking at last year's surplus from FY18 was 1.4, and we used 700K as operating and 700K as a contingency. So what happened to that contingency? Is that now part of this?
We ended up using the whole 1.4 as in our budget.
Oh, we did.
Construction. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as revenue.
So is your recommendation, Superintendent Obing, that we not use all of 1.3?
No, I'm not saying that. I just want people to be have eyes open when we're using that. It seems like gifted money, right? But it always comes with some strings. Like, don't think that it was an easy slot. And that's why we've always tried to kind of manage it a little bit each year. Like Nate and the staff do a good job of trying to watch the dollar so we can make sure we have that little bit. And we've never invested the entire amount, knowing that, okay, we have a little bit of cushion, and if you do good work, we're probably going to get another $1 million again. So just so people know that, we're starting to climb, and that's a piece that we have to be aware of. Strategically, when we've done the investments and we've added the 750 or the 500 in the first year, Nate and I have actually gone through and looked at investments that were one time and said, okay, this is one time, so we know that's only going to be spent for that, and this is one time, and we're going to, buying a software package or something like that. We know that's one time, even though it's in the budget. We know it's one time, so the next year, okay, we're off the hook on that one. But if it's like, let's say, we wanted to hire another executive assistant for the superintendent's office, right? That's not one time, right? So we kind of were been conscious of that, trying to kind of regulating that and trying to do that. So, and we will do that review again, but we're not investing as much this year, so we're not going to have that compendium to say, oh, look at all the things that were just one time, and we're not going to do it.
And everyone familiar with the education spending change? How we get the 3.5 million? From the ed, yeah, okay. I know Commissioner Carey, we spoke today, you know, again, it's either from the ed fund or from the municipality. Do you want to share your thoughts on that, or how you?
I mean, I think Nathan explained it. When the common level of appraisal falls that far below 100%, not only is the city out of compliance, but the optics are that the school budget has to absorb the taxpayer ire. But next 2 years, the city's assessments will come out, and it will flip, and the school budget will get a break. The tax, not the budget, the school tax rate will get a break.
The tax
And
rate will look
Our,
like it's
it'll
gone
look
way, way
great,
down.
and that's when it'll be a great time to add, programmatic improvements and investments to the school budget. But it just means waiting until that happens.
So I think that's.
No, just correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Carey. When it's below 0.8, isn't the city supposed to do a reassessment?
I don't think it's 80%. I think municipalities can go into is it 80%?
I think
it
it's
actually is 80%.
I mean, they give
80%. They're
like
supposed
79,
to.
78%. They give municipalities a break as long as the municipality starts getting the
Starts
RFT
getting-
out
Yeah,
and
doesn't
shows
happen overnight.
progress. But this city did not act as quickly as it should have in getting the RFT.
Because I recall last year, I believe we were at 0.79.
Right.
And we initiated
And
that
they
conversation.
started getting
they started
the RFT
getting
out, but
right.
it went too
So,
slow.
yeah.
But
So the reason for taking this opportunity to talk, I'm not getting derailed, is this is the message to the voters. You know, as school board commissioners, you know, our job is to say, or to defend an 8.52%. That's our narrative. You know,
which is a tough one to make. I mean, it's just hard,
understood.
when it's this high.
Yeah.
It's just the optics. And it would be helpful if the mayor would help with that.
Yep, and we'll look. And Commissioner Pillsbury, did you want to say something? You had your hand up.
I just said, let's not be fooled. If, when you talk about Commissioner Curry, our tax rate going down, the value of my house is gonna be up. So I'll still be paying my taxes, so let's not play games with that. I'm not looking forward to reassessment.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying
I just wanted to
it's
say that.
supposed to be
You know,
revenue neutral.
People are not fooled, they know, and that's why we need to explain to them why it's 8.5 this year and it may go down next year, but doesn't mean your tax bill will go down.
I would
Right.
never say that.
Yeah, no, and I think the point of saying, Keith, Commissioner Pillsbury, was that it's not necessarily a reflection of the.
I just wanna make sure we're.
Well, plus their tax bill will go up by 4.2%.
Right.
If it weren't for that.
Right.
So
But
the
I think-
school is always going to make
Yeah,
people's
I
taxes
think one of
go
the
up.
points you're trying to make, which will bring back for conversations, this is out of the board's control, that particular variable. It's not the board saying, oh, it's just something that's at a municipal level, and they will correct it at some point. Right?
But I think the other thing that's good is that the study for how the formula goes came back, and it actually looks like they're going to change the formula, and that will help Winooski and Burlington because we have always been hurt by that. So next year, hopefully, the formula will be.
That's the equalized.
No, you
pupil
don't
formula.
believe.
Well, I mean, right. So just to be clear, so what Commissioner Orr was referring to is the equalized pupil formula, the weighting formula that the state uses, which is prescribed in state law, and that could very well change, but it also ultimately requires legislative action, and so I think to be determined.
Well, I'm saying it could.
Right, it could. Don't lose hope.
No, in fact, Director Lavery, myself, and Commissioner Sowers this summer spoke to those advocating for that, and currently in legislation right now it's happening, and people are testifying. So thank you, Commissioner Alwell, for that comment, because it is in effect being communicated now at the state level.
I'm conscious of time, too.
Yep. Yes. Commissioner Pillsbury, Carey.
I wanted to say, you said 50, we had our equalized pupil count is down 50. Is that because we lost bodies, or was it because we have fewer students in poverty or students?
Good question.
I'm not sure exactly where.
I'd have to look back. I know that some of our some of the numbers of the students who fall into those extra weight categories did decrease.
Okay.
I can't remember if they use a 2-year ADM average, 2-year daily membership average.
Okay.
I think that number, that kind of baseline number, also went down. So I think it's a bit of all the above. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which one was the biggest
Assuming
driver.
not 50 bodies total.
No, it's almost certainly not 50 bodies, although I don't.
Careful that we explain that.
Right,
Right.
right, yeah.
Commissioner Carey? Thank you, Commissioner
Just a
Pilsner.
question about the 8.52%. So, as a Burlington citizen, I can expect that tax impact increase, even if we level fund the school budget.
Not if you level fund, not if you spent the same exact amount of dollars, but if you essentially buy the same level of service that we have this year, the cost of those services, plus some of the things that I mentioned, which you could debate whether they're not really part of the current service level, but like the increase in the debt service and stuff. So to kind of maintain the level of service, it will cost more money, and the additional money that it will cost translates into that tax rate
That's
increase.
without ads.
Yeah, that's
what I'm asking.
Yes,
Yes.
your
It's
question.
without ads.
Without
That's
ads.
without any new
No new
programmatic
investments.
services. Yep.
No new investments, right.
Correct.
Thank you, Commissioner Carey. Commissioner Carey, did you have one more thing? No? Anyone else?
For the next slide.
All right.
Okay.
This, I think we're at. So the reason for doing that is the number one goal of this meeting is, as a board, to determine what that percentage rate is to direct to the superintendent and Director Lavery. So if all we did tonight was give them our approval on that percentage, that would be setting them forward for the month to our next meeting on January 14th and conduct business. We know as a board, based on our operations in the last 3 weeks, we have members that would like to look at investments and look at reductions. So what we were going to propose is, one, we're going to go around and make a motion about the percentage, or not a motion, we'll just an agreement, a discussion.
Our comfort level with.
Great, a comfort level of what we are going to put forth, talking about these rates, and then we will break out into 3 groups to talk about investments and the paperwork that's been distributed by the district and by the board members. And then we'll come back, we'll look at those investments as a whole, and talk simultaneously with reductions, because without reductions, we aren't looking at investments.
I think we're gonna do the exec session in between there, right?
Yes,
Before
yep.
that.
After
After.
the investments and
Right.
before.
Yes,
Okay,
yep.
thank you.
Any clarifying questions about next? Okay. We're gonna first, I think what we'll do is, I think
You're
we
gonna have the
talked about
conversation,
going
right?
around, yeah, conversation, open it up for conversation, and then no voting, and no straw poll, okay. So I open the floor for discussion on, presenting, the district with direction on moving forward for the FY 2021 budget, with an increase, the baseline of, and again, as chair, neutral, I'm presenting it for discussion, the 8.5 percentage increase for this next year's budget.
Point of order?
Yep,
All right, do
Commissioner
you want to
Fisher.
set a time limit?
Yeah, I think we're gonna talk for 15.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
2 minutes per commissioner?
Yeah,
You should do it
15
per
minutes,
commissioner.
and then to ensure fair instruction, I won't go by the 2-minute rule, but I'll give you a wink so that we know we'll move on. So the goal of educating everyone with these slides and having that time period, will hopefully abbreviate the time needed to spend in talking about this baseline percentage.
Chair, point of order.
Yeah.
Are we going around, or are we just taking questions and then say, like, if you've spoken once, wait to raise your hand again until everyone has had a chance to speak? Which is your pleasure?
I think what we'll do is we'll go around the room and we'll go in counterclockwise, since the room's set up this way, or we'll go clockwise. We'll start with Commissioner Gorman. If you want to speak, you can, and then again, like we've talked in our norms.
I'm just gonna throw this out
Yep.
there, because I think board members probably have a lot of dialogue they want. Maybe, no?
Nope.
No? Okay.
We've done
Okay.
some pre-work.
All right,
but-
good. I'll shut up then.
Well, we'll see.
All right. All right. Did
Gonna
that,
pass.
did I answer your question? Okay. Commissioner Gorman?
So we're commenting on the tax rate right now?
Yeah,
8.52, right?
yeah.
Can I put a gloss on that, Chair? I think what the chair is asking is, what we're trying to get a sense of your comfort level with the baseline budget, which represents an estimated 8.52 increase, or your discomfort level with it, and you could say, I'm not willing to go that high, or I'm willing to go higher. And so we're trying to come to some informal consensus at a estimated tax rate increase, so that we can then, that will inform our small group discussion, and it will also inform, obviously, the superintendent and his team. It'll inform our small group discussion regarding any ads, any cuts. So that, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, and if we don't want to go individual by individual, I can simply state, is there any clarification or may I hear support for the 8.5% level funding,
Sure,
baseline
I support
funding?
it, yeah.
So I guess what I would say is that from what I understand from the city council is that there's very likely going to be a municipal tax rate increase request as well. So I think our budget will go down, and for that reason, I would put something on the ballot that's around 8.75.
Thank you, Commissioner Carey.
I support a baseline budget too, as well, of 8.5.
Thank you, Commissioner Sowers. Commissioner Pillsbury.
The budget will increase by over 3%. Basically, that's what we're proposing, over 8%. I did propose last time, I said 2 million, I had no idea what the impact was, but I wanted some reductions. So 8.5 is the highest I'm going to go. I still would like to see some more reduction. I think people are asking us to be accountable. We're asking for 3.25, I think. That was the number you showed up there, increasing the budget, a baseline budget, we call it a baseline budget. So, you know, I've sold higher budgets, but, you know, we better look like we are looking to make sure that we're actually having direct services to students, and that we're not adding mid-management or higher management, that they see that kids are getting direct services. That's what I definitely support.
Thank you, Commissioner Pillsbury. So that's a yes to 8.5. Thank you. Commissioner Ivanchik.
Well, I think this is kind of a funny way of doing business, and I know the 8.5 is out of our control, part of the CLA. I mean, last year we were discussing at 4% or 3%. Oh, and inflation is at 2%.
Yep.
So that's going up every year, and our taxes are going up every year. So I don't know whose paycheck is going up by that much every year. But it's a funny way of doing business and discussing how much the tax rate should go up. I will say I support the 8.5 because I mean, I think we, as Commissioner Pillsbury suggested, we should look at cuts and see where we could cut positions in the district, but definitely focus on direct instruction, less administration. But I guess my upshot is I support the 8.5.
Thank you. Commissioner Waltz?
Same, although I think I'd be a little bit more generous. For sure, direct service is the priority. And when I say I support the baseline, I'm thinking more of the services that are in that baseline.
Correct.
So yeah.
Commissioner Alwell?
I also support 8.5.
Thank you. Commissioner Carey?
I too support that figure. I'm bearing in mind the budget and the ads that were made last year, and understanding, even though I don't like it, I'm understanding that this might be a pause year in some ways. And I will echo a few of my fellow commissioners here when they said that any additions need to be for direct student services, period.
Thank you, Commissioner Carey. Commissioner Fisher?
Oh,
They went.
I will yield some of my time.
I'm just curious, are we spouting our philosophies now as well as our number, or just our numbers?
I think it was going a little hand in hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I'm on the fence. I'm undecided. 8.52% is something I never thought I would consider supporting. Talking to my neighbors and my constituents, there are some who, 4% is they're living on a fixed income, and it's, everyone's heard that story. On the other hand, I've underestimated the Burlington voters' willingness to support generous budgets and bonds. Consistently underestimated them. So I don't know. I'm not as sure as Commissioner Curry that 8.5 would fail. I think we have a strong story saying we're not adding services. This is a factor of the numbers, a factor of the environment we're operating in, and that will make sense to some voters, and some voters will see 8.5% and the municipal increase and vote no. And I don't know what the right thing is, but certainly 8.5 is way higher than I thought I would ever support. It's an undecided.
Okay. Commissioner Wick.
Is everyone else gone?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat as everybody.
Yes, understood. Thank you. Commissioner Wick.
Thanks, Claire. I want to know, for what it's worth, pro and con, that last year when we approved our budget, we also had an estimated tax increase at the time of, and Nathan can correct me if he knows, but it was roughly 7%. I'm not saying you have to have the same appetite every year, but just for historical accuracy. And 2 years ago, when I was on the board, prior to Claire and the group's period just prior, the board approved something that at the time they believed was going to be a 7.99% percent increase to the budget.
Yep.
So all that to say, I'm very uncomfortable with an 8.52% estimated property tax increase on the education side of our tax bill. It's very discomforting to me. However, when looking at the alternative, Nathan had a slide up there that showed how much we'd have to cut to buy it down to a 7%, and that was almost $1 million. If we wanted to buy it down to a 6%, $1.6 million in cuts. Buy it down to 5, which is more like my comfort level, 4 to 5 in a perfect world. $2.3 million of cuts. I don't see that happening as an elected commissioner, or I don't see it being a fair result to the kids. So I am willing to accept a baseline budget. In other words, the budget increases are solely due to the items that Nathan outlined, which is the typical cost of living plus the usually egregious health insurance premium increases each year that befall all of us inside and outside public education. So I'm nervous about selling it to the taxpayers, but I do believe on balance, if they understand why, and we can demonstrate to them that there isn't a lot of fat to be cut, that were we making cuts, we'd be cutting into muscle and possibly bone. That brings me to support something that makes me uncomfortable. And furthermore, what I'm still struggling with is, do we consider this the sort of year of deferred investments, the year of deferred hope, and just ask the superintendent what are the minimum legally required investments that he'd require, and then not make any cuts or other adds, and then just hope to God that a year from now is a little better of a structurally sound environment in state ed funding law. So I just wanted to give you a little bit about where I'm at. So on balance, I too would support the baseline budget.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. Anyone else?
Well, I'll speak to philosophy since
I know.
other people did.
Thank you, Commissioner Gould.
So, for the last 2 years, we've heard a lot about direct instruction. I think it's really important. I'm a teacher. I'm an educator. I get it. Teachers are important. You can't run a district without a strong administration. As a teacher, I rely on a healthy HR department. I rely on a healthy central office. These are part and parcel to running a high-quality school district. To think that we can just keep adding teachers while we're not supporting our administration is, I think it's disingenuous. I also think that we seem to have a model here that is working really well in terms of the instructional coaching. It is a really great way of delivering professional instruction. So why would we want to take that away? It's not only a way to educate our teachers, it's a way to increase climate, to add another, highly educated and highly skilled person into a building. I find it just seems strange to me that, there are people who want to get rid of that model. If we are going to support our instructional coaches, how about looking at, can we cut some professional development money in other areas? That may be a union issue, I don't know. But if it's a great way to deliver PD and it improves climate and it improves, scores, test scores and so on, why not keep it? You may not see it as direct instruction, and yet it seems like a vital part of a kid's education. So there's some nuance there that I think we all will need to discuss.
Thank you,
at a
Commissioner
more
Goh.
granular level. Yep.
Thank you. So with that feedback, Superintendent Obeng and Director Lavery, I think you have a clear message of what our threshold is, given the unique circumstances of this year's budget cycle, and we'll now break into our sessions as discussed in pre-planning of this meeting. We did make copies, board officers made copies of the documents that were circulated by the district for those investments, as well as the commissioner document that is on board docs, just hard copies. And then we created an Excel chart to be able to list and discuss those investments as we see prioritizing.
Can you just in summary, so people kind of, so what I've heard is that the board is supportive of us having a budget that has a tax impact of 8.52, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So now you're going to engage in the exercise of looking at possible investments, and then we'll have a conversation about possible reductions.
Yes, separate from the,
right, that'll just meet those items that may come up.
one for one, right.
Chair, well,
And I heard some other comments.
Point of
So I
clar-
just didn't know if you were incorporating.
Is it also fair game in the small group discussion if the group decided not to make any adds or cuts and just to keep a steady state, if that was the will of the small group in their discussion, just to say, you know what? We don't necessarily want to find an ad that would then necessitate a cut of, say, instructional coaches or something like that, and that you could then just say, we just want the steady state.
Understood, yes. We asked, I got numerous commissioners reaching out to us saying, within the three scenarios that the district presented us as far as investments requests or budget requests that all our administrators and district leaders went through in this cycle, budget cycle. And so we would ask in these three group settings that the superintendent and Director Lavery again, report to us things that if it's needed for compliance, but there's nothing that we've seen or communication from you that any of these investments are mandatory or compliance related or a necessity. They come from the administrators or the district leaders.
Yeah, I can just comment on that. Yes, you're absolutely right. The only item that I would say that helps us meet some compliance pieces is the $50,000 around the Safe School, because those dollars are being contributed to the Equity Study Center and DOJ work that we'll be doing.
Yes.
So that's the only one that we really need to have dollars for.
Okay. The last item on the 499, which we'll show you.
40,000.
We'll do it.
The original request was 50, but of that, we brought it down to 40 because, again, we were trying to hit a target. But within that 40, some of the investment would go to supporting the work that you have described.
Commissioner Carey.
Thanks. Can I ask a question of Director Phillips? The funding that pays for instructional coaches, can that money be used for anything else?
The part that's not funded out of local is out of our 2A, and 2A money has to be spent, the overarching category is professional development. The major strategy that the AOE in Vermont and at the federal level approves for that is through instructional coaching. That's their preferred model.
And how much of what we spend on it comes from 2A?
I'd have to check with Nate on the exact numbers, but it's more than half the cost is picked up in Title II.
Thank you.
Commissioner Waltz.
Can I ask a clarification about City and Lake program? So the budget that we were proposed, is some of that a part of the baseline? Or is any of it a part of the baseline?
There's already some money in the budget that supports City and Lake in two forms. One, of course, is the two particular high school teachers who are BSD employees, and we pay 100% of their costs, and that's embedded. But then there's also a small amount of money that we have that allows them to just buy some stuff that they need to buy. So, but it's not a lot of money. The beyond that, there are other major costs, including for for the other staff that the program has and some of their other costs, they have generated through grants and other fundraising efforts. And so, to the extent that that program would continue next year at the kind of same cost, absent adopting the recommendation that Andy presented, then they would have to continue to do that same fundraising for another year in order to sustain that level of investment.
So what Andy asked for was the base that they needed in addition to what the district already supplies.
Yeah, that was the increase.
In addition to, okay, got it.
As I understand it, yes.
Commissioner Sowers.
Yeah, so I had a good meeting with Noel today to kind of get some clarifying answers to those questions, and Stephanie, you can jump in too, specifically about that City and Lake, because I was under a little bit of a wrong impression. So basically, the program can continue next year as is, with the current level of funding, with no additional money.
Right.
So that I had not understood.
Could you say that again? I didn't understand.
So the Burlington, that program, the Burlington and Lake, City and Lake can continue as is with no additional funding. Stephanie's going to talk about it a little bit more. Do you want to speak why that can be?
I don't know if now's the time, but
I think, instead of breaking out
it's good to hear it. There's a few major things.
Yes, thank you.
So, so Nate just sort of spoke to this, but part of what Andy had proposed was that in place of the fundraising efforts for the administrative costs, as well as I think they have about $7,000 in rent. So they had asked for, rather than the fundraising approach that they've been doing, if that might be expenses that the district would pick up. So the administrative oversight, and I believe the rent is currently around $7,000. As Nate mentioned, we have in our budget already the funds for the 2 teaching positions. There are some small supply costs that we cover. Additionally, we, out of our Title IV, which is a relatively new title in the last couple of years, we use some Title IV funds to support what we call program experiences for the students. So if no new money goes into the budget for BCL, we still have the teachers in place, we still have the supply money, we still have the funds that we'll be able to request out of Title IV for the student community experiences. What it would mean is that as a district, and Noel and I have talked about this, we would have to figure out the oversight, someone administratively to oversee the program. Check in with the teachers, make sure the rent is paid, make sure, any contracts with community partners are in place, those types of pieces. So Noel and I have talked that if there's no money that goes into the budget for BCO, he and I will strategize between my staff and his staff so that the programming continues for students.
Commissioner Fisher?
Just to clarify, what you're saying is, there's a community organizer and a program director positions, that the request was that VSD take those on. If we don't take those on, the programming can continue without those positions, and we'll figure out that they're,
Commissioner Carey.
Stephanie, I hit on you again, but
I didn't quite understand the answer you gave to Liz when she asked about the two, did you say the 2A money?
Yeah,
And the
so
coaching fund?
Title II, so there are 4 titles of federal money. Title IIA is considered professional development funds. And within that, there are certain strategies that will be approved both at the federal and state level. The most common of those strategies. To get the funds.
Okay.
The most common of those strategies that's approved in Title II is instructional coaching.
Okay. That's the most common, but it's not the only.
But it has to be of a professional development. So if you don't pay it on coaches, you pay for workshops or other things. It's not direct service. Like Title I is direct service money to students. So Title II, so we can't hire another classroom teacher or another interventionist with it.
No, but teachers could use that money perhaps to do something that they're interested in, pursue because it's professional development?
You can't, it's not individualized by teacher. So it's not like, say, a tuition reimbursement type approach where a teacher could, ask to have those funds for their own professional learning. It would have to be like
Groups or
some,
schools,
like an
groups or
in-service presentation
Yeah,
where
okay.
we're
Sure.
including the whole district.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just say 2 more things about the high school thing, since we were talking about that with the meeting with Noel. Basically, he said his number 1 priority, because it's important, I think, to know what he would like to do, is that computer science teacher for the $90,000. That would be his first priority. The second would be the high school biology request here, but he had a slightly different request, so I just want to let people know that it would be a 0.6 kind of flexible position, so that when they look at the numbers, if they change the policy, which they can change it to have earth science and biology for freshmen, depending on the numbers for dual enrollment, if they only have 1 section of biology, it would give them flexibility to use that money where they needed it in other departments. So that 0.6 would be great to have, to use for flex, to be able to change that policy, allow the students to take dual enrollment, but really also take the money and see where else it might be needed based on enrollment of other classes, which was part of our priorities for this year. And the third thing that he said was really crucial as well was the social worker, that he wanted to extract a little bit from the Howard Center, because they're quite limited of what they're really getting for services from the Howard Center. So he wanted the 0.4% would make somebody whole. And in comparison, the middle schools, each have 1 social worker, and BHS has 1.6, and they're 2.5 times larger than the middle schools. So he just wanted to throw that out as to his justification of why he wants that in-house. They can service far more kids than what you could get 0.4 from the Howard Center. And I think that's it.
Thank you.
I
Commissioner
just have
Alwell?
a question there. The point, when you have the Howard service.
Yep.
The whole family is covered. And that's not true when it's an
That's
in-house.
true.
So
It's just far more kids can be covered, and they could be
Good, but
utilize the services than the families, and maybe that's a discussion that we could have with the city of how we cover the families, like if we need to.
Commissioner Wick? Thank you, Commissioner.
I would just like to say that when we are breaking out into small groups and we're coming up with our additions, and then later we'll be coming up with separate subtractions, I just don't want us to get too excited about the additions, because the harder thing is going to be subtractions on a dollar-for-dollar basis. So my sense is, let's not get too excited about our list unless you can come up with subtractions, and that's going to be
Understood.
hard.
Yep, Commissioner Ivanchik. and
That's
then
why
we'll
I'm
move on.
wondering why we're not doing subtractions first.
Yep.
Figure out what we want to cut. If we can't cut anything, why even talk about additions?
Got it. We're going to move in this scenario because we've spent work, or we've asked the district to spend work on all the input that administrators have given over the course of this year, budget cycle, as well as board members have discussed. And so we will, I hear your point, and I accept it as the way, and appreciate it, but we're going to move forward with this process. So, yep.
Sorry, can I ask? when they're looking at investments, are there any parameters? Because you asked us to do 3 different scenarios. I think we stuck. Or is it open? Like they come back with $1 million, or are you giving? Is it the 500 and less, or?
As board officers, we didn't want to, we gave you the parameters last time. So when we look at the district parameters, it was 500,000, then it was 1.3, and then the second one, 1.2, and then the third one was 1.9. Knowing, what the realities are and what you've educated us on, that there is no fat necessarily in the district at this time, I think our number for a baseline or would be in the 300, 500 range that we talked about as the baseline originally. As a whole group, we decided and gave you that direction. So I don't think it would exceed the 500, but that's just my interpretation.
Chair, as Vice Chair, I hope this isn't I'd like to add my gloss to that, which is, I think what you did was incredibly helpful in prioritizing it. And when that happened, we didn't have one key bit of information that came out later, and that was that third number. What was it, Nathan? The pupil count? Something we didn't have at that time.
We definitely didn't have the CLA at that time.
That was it. So that after we'd asked them for 3 scenarios, we found out just how ugly, for lack of a better word, the situation was. So my sense was the board officers are allowing some degree of flexibility in the small group parts, but just be mindful that if you're going to have a big list of ads, to some degree, I would personally suggest you also have to be accountable for equal subtractions.
Yeah, and not knowing what those are. That's why we're going to go into exec session. We're going to hear from the district other information, and then we would come out and talk about those reductions. Commissioner Sowers?
And can I ask a specific question? So then from this list that we have been given, for example, when you had like 2 driver positions on here for 90,000, but then the bus was on number 3, the 2 extra buses. So like, don't those have to go together?
Yes and no. And
okay.
I'll answer
Just want to be
that.
sure.
Question.
Ideally, obviously, we would do both.
Okay.
We have some fleet flexibility, and also part of those drivers, the idea was we potentially wouldn't buy full-on bus for those because we're trying to have more flexibility in the routes to reduce drive times. So we might make use of lower cost vehicles, and so we would have to kind of make that work with the fleet that we do have, which might mean actually using essentially a bigger vehicle than we need, and figuring out how to make sure we have two vehicles available. But we felt like we could probably pull that off. Candidly, we haven't had good luck also hiring bus drivers. There's a national shortage in bus drivers. Part of what this would do would allow us to potentially hire some staff that won't need those licenses. So there's a potential in this equation to allow us to make use of some of our bigger vehicles, but also essentially make use of a smaller vehicle, which we might be able to buy without needing to add it to the budget, which is really what it boils down to. We might be able to like pull off the vehicle addition with other funds. That would be the goal.
But it gives us the capacity down the road. Let's say next year, if we're looking at some additions and you can buy a bus, we'll have the staffing to be able to support that. They'll be trained, they'll be doing other work as well too.
Okay.
So instead of getting
Can I ask a
both
point
the
of
same.
clarification to follow up? Unless, are you?
No, I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you saying that our existing fleet gives us more flexibility than was originally thought? Or are you saying that our property management budget would allow us to purchase a non-CDL vehicle?
I'm saying what we would do is potentially look at our existing property services budget, and between this year and next year, carve out the funds to buy at least one smaller vehicle so that we can have that flexibility without having to add it to the budget. That's the kind of management trade-off that we would have to do to pull that off so that we could have the flexibility.
And so can you help me understand why then, if we're only buying one vehicle, how 2 more drivers would help us?
Potentially because we already have another vehicle that we could put in,
We do.
in service.
So our existing fleet actually does
But
give
it's-
us more flexibility.
Well, we have one extra vehicle right now, which
Yeah.
is one of the other.
That's what I was asking.
Okay.
If our existing fleet gives us more flexibility than we thought.
Okay, yes, in that
Yes.
sense, yes.
Non-CDL.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so we will start Commissioner Wick, then Fisher, we'll go around, and just count off by 1, 2, 3. So we'll go
1,
2,
3, 1, 2.
3.
Yeah. Carey, you're 1.
2, 3.
1, 3. Okay.
Where do the 1s, 2s, and 3s meet?
This is
Well,
table 1.
Thank you.
That's table 2. That's table 3.
How much time?
20 minutes. Grab my water bottle. I was like,
Someone else's notes are here? Oh, geez.
So we are going to give an opportunity for somebody from each group to share their thoughts about the categories. We've tried to list them all up here to start the process. And one of the things we want to do is identify the trends. So we'll be able to identify from each group there are things that are in common. So those are things that will probably start a new group around the commonalities, and that maybe help in deciding what you finally go with. We'll start with group 1 because theirs is pretty simple. So I think Jeff, you want to speak to your group? Group 1?
Sure. And I'd say if after I say what I say very briefly, someone else from the group feels the need to add something else, to be fair, let me know. But we could only find, where all 4 of us agreed, one item. And we actually suggested that $40,000 safe and inclusive schools item could and should be found in the current budget so that it wouldn't necessarily be deemed new money. At least that's what we're proposing. So essentially we've got no adds there at all, if that can be true. But I think the other gloss I want to mention is there were a series of things that our group split either 1 versus 3 or 2 versus 2. So the only thing that made our list was unanimity, and we virtually only had one thing there. But to give you a brief flavor, we were split on the library funding. We were split on computer science and the science position flexibility at the high school. We were split on the database person. We were split on the driver. Prunes or chocolate?
I think it's prunes.
And I think those were our,
Do you want me?
did I forget any ads that we were split on that we felt compelled to even discuss?
I would just clarify that we felt that the safe and inclusive schools could come out of the 3.5 million.
Yep.
Yeah,
We got that.
thank you.
Thank you. That was very good in terms of your analysis there. The something I was going to say in relation to that, but I forgot it, so we're going to move to group 2. Group
What?
2.
Group 2.
Oh, it's almost the same.
Safe and inclusive schools, we wanted to honor Noel's request for a VHS computer science teacher. We compromised with 1 bus driver as opposed to 2. Kathy and all of us feel, investing in early ed pays dividends in the end, so there's our investment in early ed. And then, the early literacy PD, because everyone should be doing Orton Gillingham and on the same page with that, so there you go.
Okay. Now I remember what I was going to say. The whatever you decide, you know that there's going to be something left out, regardless, right? And just so you understand, when the staff put forward their recommendations, they did it together, knowing that there are things that they would like to have, but they felt that these were items that supported their priorities that they've gone through: early intervention, achievement gap, and those kind of things.
The proposal was for 2 early ed, and we went with 1.
Right. So just to just understand that, so don't feel that you're missing something out, because regardless what you do, someone's not going to get something. So, group number 3.
So we figured the 40,000 for safe and inclusive schools is not an option. Kind of a joke that DHS does not have computer science in this day and age, 2020. So that's essential. And then we compromised on the 1 bus driver, although I guess the details of that still aren't totally clear. 5,000 for Hunt field trip is a minimum amount of money out of the budget. There's definitely an inequity issue there. One example I'll throw out is Matt Chandler's class from Edmonds Middle walked up to UVM the week before Christmas, his 6th grade, you know, my kid's 6th grade class at Hunt can't do that. So, so that's why our group supported that. And then we wanted to add to what we started last year. We added 9 paras in kindergarten, and we'd like to continue adding kindergarten paras.
Okay. So there you have it. You can see there's some consensus around, well, at least around the first one for sure, and then 2 others that have support around the computer science and the bus driver. So I would submit to the chair what you want to do with the others, if there's conversations around these pieces or not. I know the first group probably looks like you guys wanted to hold a line, right? You're really working on trying to hold the line, so I don't know if there's any conversation more around that. But this gives you at least an organization now in terms of under that 500 limit that we can talk about.
One question I would ask, thank you, Superintendent Obang, and this was great. I didn't expect this, and this was a nice surprise. So thank you, Director Lavery, and to be able to look at this right away and synchronize it. I was wondering, you know, we were going to talk about it on a what am I trying to say?
Chart paper.
Yeah, a piece of paper. So thank you. We didn't find, and obviously we're proponents of early literacy, but on any of the 3 sheets, our group did look for early literacy PD at 25,000. Where did that come from, Group 2?
It's on the one before it. That, you know, we got this one, but on the longer list, it's on that.
Okay.
It's
The Gang
the
of Six
Orton
list.
Gillingham training.
Okay.
So
All right.
Didn't make the
first
final
draft that Nathan
3,
did
the
was
final
Yeah.
spreadsheet.
Before this, so the
Full
overall
list of-
5.2 list.
It didn't
Okay.
make scenario 1, 2, or 3 that.
It's not on one of these scenarios,
Yeah.
right? But it's in the scenario that was produced by board members. That's what you're
Right.
saying.
Okay. Oh, gang of 6. Now I know what you meant.
Okay. All right. And any other questions? Any commissioners have about any of the other? Oh, I know what it was. The ECSC Early K Initiative, new to commissioners, and I know Commissioner Carey and I had spoken about that as well. Is that something that, you know, I mean, I just heard of it. I don't know if other school board members had heard of it before. Is it anything been piloted, or is there, you know, this is new to the superintendent?
Essentially be piloting it.
So-
We'd be starting it here. So as I understand it, I'm not an expert in this, and Stephanie, weigh into if you remember this, but the way I understand it is the idea of having an early childhood special educator, which is typically, those are the teachers that we have in our preschool programs, but this would allow one of those teachers to be in a kindergarten classroom, co-teaching with a kindergarten teacher, but to help in situations where there are students who are at kindergarten age, but who, for whatever combination of opportunities and experiences and so forth, aren't really ready. They're fully ready for kindergarten at that point. So this is trying to help by providing that extra support, in the hopes that by providing that early extra support, it reduces future challenges that those students experience. Did I capture that broadly?
Yeah, so it'd be like a transition classroom. Would give the opportunity for a kindergarten teacher and an early childhood specialist to work together and take a group of students who have gone through preschool but have been identified as not quite ready for kindergarten.
And I think it's safe to say we have probably the population that we could easily make use of the 2 that were requested, but on the other hand, maybe one is reasonable as a kind of pilot approach. It's not like it won't work to do it in one place, it just won't serve as many of those students.
And given our population, there's no other sources of funding that we could see.
Well, you know, I'll just say, this is, staff wanted to, one of the priorities for staff in developing this was around early intervention, right, starting at the early ages. So they wanted to put resources towards the early ages. This is a new initiative, so it's not something that's existing. So it is possible to say, okay, we might have to delay this or not because it is brand new. But I mean, there's certainly needs at the early stages, and so there could be a number of resources. But this was the one that they identified. So it wouldn't be taking away anything if we didn't do it. But I know they would welcome the opportunity to start this this strategy.
Yep, and I know that we received, you know, when Stacy came and explained this position to the board at the last meeting, so I don't want to reiterate that same.
Just
Board
at
members.
which school would this position be located?
It's to be determined.
Okay.
Commissioner Alwell?
No, I was also thinking, does this not fall under special ed? I mean, would it not be part of Medicaid or special ed funding?
It would be,
Not enough money.
I think it probably, I'm not 100% sure, but in terms of like whether or not you could use Medicaid funding for a position like this, you probably could. But I don't know that we actually have enough money to add this into our Medicaid as well, on top of everything else we're doing with that money right now.
Commissioner Waltz?
And some of that information you sent us recently about Medicaid funds, kindergartners accessing Medicaid funds is almost like unheard of because you can't really test a kid yet. It's one of those things like, how do you know they qualify unless there's, something incredibly obvious, which they'd already be on an IEP if that was the case. But back to this position, is this teacher certified to teach kindergarten in addition to the preschool experience? Because instead of it being kindergarteners that aren't ready for kindergarten, could it be maybe preschoolers with kindergarteners who aren't ready for kindergarten?
They've talked about that, and they would probably iron out the model.
Okay.
That has been part of the discussion,
Great.
but to be clear, it probably, and there might be a few students, we'll see, I think, and Stacey would have to go into more detail, but as I understood it, at the end of the day, we're not talking about adding a whole new class here. We're talking about taking the existing kindergarten class and adding in this extra support to it. So, by and large, we're talking about kindergarten age students in that classroom because we have to serve the kindergartners and we're not adding a whole new classroom.
Okay. Great. All right. Any other questions around it? All right. Yeah, so we'll
If I may,
conclude
just
this. Yeah.
just an observation, I put it up there because I think it's worth, as we transition into the discussions about reductions, to see both, obviously, it's pretty straightforward to be like, well, if you did pick the one thing that everyone identifies, right, there's $40,000 of new costs, and I just kind of tried to summarize down here, right, where my cursor is, there it is.
175.
Right, so, and then you take that second tier where there was two groups agreed, okay, this is just me grouping it, but you can kind of see those two things adding up to 175. And then I said, well, suppose we did everything on this list. What would that total cost be? And in fact, that actually comes in still less than like the $500,000 lower scenario here. So as you think about the reductions and, kind of what it takes to get to each of these levels, at least this gives one approach to thinking about it in terms of these tiers. Like, can we manage 40, yes or no? Can we manage maybe 175 or so forth?
Yes. Commissioner Curry?
I mean, I appreciate the math, but I wouldn't skip over the fact that those 4 items for paras and early literacy are not like things that we've all discussed at all. Like,
Right, I know.
they're not like, they're just like two groups came up with a bunch of other stuff, and we didn't. We just focused on the process as we laid it out, which is coming up with.
Wait a minute, that's not true.
Last one.
These have been, I'm sorry, but they are on all the different other ones we got.
Oh, I know, but I'm just saying, like, what Nathan just did is just to say if we did all this, that would be 385, which is less than 500. I'm just saying, like, all this isn't like something that's actually under discussion with the whole group.
Understood.
Like we would
Understood.
all
So
have
we-
to
the
discuss
next-
those 4 line items.
Yes.
Just because 2
Understood.
groups came up with them doesn't mean like
We did
the
not-
other group automatically
No.
agrees.
We did
The
not
goal of
deliberate.
the goal of this was to
No
take away what
deliberation,
Nate
right.
just did, the blue and the rose color.
Yeah.
That was the goal.
I just thought that Nate's comment could lead certain people in a certain direction.
Yes,
that
understood.
would not actually be an accurate conclusion.
Thank you. Okay.
The
Great.
question is, what do you want to do with this data? Because the only thing that's really has 100% consensus is the safe, inclusive schools piece.
Right. That
So-
we're not going to do anything at this point. We are going to just hold this document for, now we move into the exec sessions to talk about reductions, to even look at, the 40. We're all in agreement with the 40. That's the only thing that we're looking at as a unified board. at this time. So, Commissioner Wick?
Yep. I'd like to make the motion to go into executive session, but just in plain English, I think we're going to want to have, as I understand it, we're going to want to have the flexibility in executive session to discuss bargaining matters and also potentially some sensitive employee evaluative kind of matters. So to that end, I'm about to make a motion to go into executive session to consider executive session under 1 VSA 313, and then I'll just recite the various statutory subsections. A1, A, B, C, E, and F, and A3, because premature general knowledge would put the district at a substantial disadvantage relating to labor negotiations, and also consistent with those numbers to go in to potentially discuss one or more personnel matters.
Great. Do I have a second? Second. Commissioner Ivanchik. And the goal of this exec session is no more than 15 to 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll come out. Yep,
Okay.
all those in favor of moving into
So
exec
we're-
session, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We'll move into exec session.